There's a number hiding in every jar of peanut butter that most shoppers never think about. 90%. That's the minimum amount of peanuts required for a product to legally be called peanut butter. But here's where things get interesting. 7 major brands we looked at take almost the same shortcut, while 3 take a very different approach. And this isn't a new story. A 1959 government study found some products labeled peanut butter contained as little as 75% peanuts, triggering more than a decade of regulatory battles. In 1971, the 90% standard was finally upheld. 7 follow the industry formula, 3 break away from it. And what separates them is sitting right there on the ingredient label. Let's open the jars. Number 7. Simply Jif Creamy, the one that markets itself as the responsible upgrade. Simply Jif exists because Smuckers noticed people were starting to read labels. The pitch is right there on the front of the jar. 33% less sugar than regular Jif, lower sodium, positioned as the version you buy when you want to feel like you made a better choice without actually switching brands. Flip it over. Roasted peanuts, then 2% or less of fully hydrogenated vegetable oils, rapeseed and soybean, mono and diglycerides, molasses, sugar, salt. The sugar didn't disappear, it moved to the back of the ingredient list and got smaller. About 1 gram of added sugar per serving instead of 2, which is a real reduction. But the hydrogenated oil is still there, doing the same job it does in the regular jar, keeping the fat evenly suspended through the peanut solids so the texture stays uniform and you never have to stir. 65 milligrams of sodium, 7 grams of protein, 200 calories. This is what reformulation looks like when a company doesn't want to actually simplify a product, just shrink one line item enough to justify a percentage claim on the label. Number 6. Kroger Creamy Peanut Butter, the one built to be invisible. Kroger doesn't market this jar at all, and that's the point. Read the ingredient list. Roasted peanuts, sugar, contains 2% or less of molasses. Fully hydrogenated vegetable oils, rapeseed, cottonseed, soybean, salt. That is, ingredient for ingredient, nearly identical to Jif's own formula, molasses and all. Store brands like this one exist specifically to replicate the category leader's recipe closely enough that shoppers can't tell the difference in a blind taste test. Then undercut it on price, because there's no advertising budget attached to the jar. There's no positioning claim to fact-check here, no heritage story, no reformulation press release. It's a private label copy of the best-selling formula in the country, sitting one shelf over from the original. If store-brand chicken or store-brand pasta sauce taught you anything about how private label works in a grocery aisle, this is the peanut butter version of the same playbook, running quietly in the background while the name brand gets the marketing spend. Number 5. Great Value Creamy Peanut Butter, the one with 2 sweeteners doing one job. Walmart's peanut butter carries one of the longest ingredient lists in this video's skip section, and it's the only jar here pairing sugar with a second, different added sweetener, dextrose, rather than the sugar and molasses combination used elsewhere in this list. Peanuts, sugar, hydrogenated vegetable oil, rapeseed, cottonseed, and soybean. 3 separate oil sources blended into one. Dextrose, salt, molasses, monoglycerides. Sugar and dextrose are both added sweeteners in the same jar, working from 2 different directions to hit the same flavor target, which is a formulation choice, not a taste requirement. Monoglycerides function alongside the hydrogenated oil as a second emulsifier. smoothing the texture further so the finished spread feels uniformly soft rather than grainy. None of that makes this jar dangerous. It makes it the most heavily engineered formula on the shelf for a product that, by legal definition, is at least 90% just ground peanuts. At roughly 10 cents an ounce, it's also one of the cheapest jars in this video. Cheaper even than Jif, which runs closer to 17 cents an ounce for the same size container. The complexity here is the actual story. This is what a formula looks like when it's optimized purely for shelf stability and cost per ounce, with flavor and texture propped up through additive after additive, instead of through the peanuts doing the work on their own. Emulsifiers like monoglycerides work at the molecular level, binding the fat and water components of the paste together, so the spread stays smooth and glossy straight out of the jar, instead of developing the slightly grainy oil-pooled surface you get from a formula with fewer stabilizing agents fighting to hold it together. Number 4. Peter Pan Creamy Peanut Butter, the one that counts to 4 and calls it a stopping point. Peter Pan's own marketing leans on the phrase 4 simple ingredients, and the panel backs it up on paper. Roasted peanuts, sugar, then less than 2% of hydrogenated vegetable oil, rapeseed and cottonseed, and salt. 4 ingredients genuinely is fewer than several other jars in this video, tied for the shortest list in this entire skip section alongside Skippy, and shorter than Great Value or Reese's, both still ahead of it on this countdown. But simple is doing a specific kind of work in that marketing line. The sugar is added deliberately, not incidental to the peanuts. And the hydrogenated oil exists to prevent the natural oil separation that happens whenever you grind peanuts with nothing else added. 4 ingredients reads like transparency. What it actually describes is a formula where half of those 4 ingredients exist specifically to manage sweetness and texture, not to be peanuts. It's the more restrained version of the exact same approach every jar so far has taken. Restrained is still the same direction, just a smaller step down that road. A shorter ingredient list earns real credit in this comparison, but shorter isn't the same question as whether every ingredient on it is there to be peanuts, or there to manage what happens when a formula doesn't fully trust the peanuts to hold themselves together. Number 3. Reese's Creamy Peanut Butter, the one made by a candy company. Reese's built an entire confectionery empire on the combination of peanut butter and chocolate, and this jar is the standalone version of that same peanut butter, sold to go straight into your own baking and sandwiches, rather than wrapped around a cup of chocolate. Read the label. Peanuts, sugar, then 2% or less of hydrogenated vegetable oil, rapeseed, cottonseed, and soybean oils, salt, peanut oil, molasses, monoglycerides. That's 7 named ingredients on the standard label, climbing to 8 on some package sizes that also list cornstarch. And it includes peanut oil listed as its own separate ingredient on top of the whole peanuts themselves. Hershey didn't build the Reese's brand by chasing minimalism, and this jar reflects the same design philosophy that built the candy cups, engineered for a specific candy-adjacent sweetness and a smoother, richer mouthfeel, not for the shortest possible ingredient panel. There's nothing dishonest about a candy company selling candy-adjacent peanut butter under its own name. It's just worth knowing that's precisely what you're buying when you reach for it as an everyday pantry staple instead of as a dessert ingredient, the way it was originally designed to function. The added peanut oil on top of the whole peanuts is a specific tell. It's there to boost the fat content beyond what plain roasted peanuts naturally provide, pushing the spread toward the same rich, almost fudgy mouthfeel you'd associate with the inside of a candy cup at the cost of a longer ingredient panel than a plain sandwich spread arguably needs. We're 3 down, 4 more to go, and then the 3 brands that actually stopped at just peanuts. If you've spotted a jar in your own pantry on this list so far, a quick like helps this kind of breakdown reach more people. Takes 1 second. Number 2, Skippy Creamy Peanut Butter. The one that's nearly a century old and still hasn't dropped the oil. Skippy has been on shelves since the early 1930s. Old enough that nearly 100 years of peanut butter passion is a claim the brand can genuinely back up with a timeline. The ingredient list: roasted peanuts, sugar, hydrogenated vegetable oil, cottonseed, soybean, and rapeseed oil, salt. 3 separate oil sources blended into one hydrogenated ingredient, there for the same reason it's in every other jar so far, to stop the peanut oil from separating, so the jar never needs a stir before use. Worth being precise about what that oil actually is, because the word alone tends to trigger more alarm than the ingredient deserves. Fully hydrogenated oil, which is what's listed here, is not the same thing as the partially hydrogenated oil the FDA formally banned from the US food supply in 2018 for its trans fat content. Partial hydrogenation is what creates trans fat. Pushing the process all the way through to full hydrogenation brings trans fat back down to essentially 0, which is exactly why every major brand in this video lists 0 grams of trans fat per serving. So this isn't a trans fat problem. It's a why is there a processed industrial fat in my peanut butter at all problem. And the answer, unchanged across roughly 9 decades of production, is convenience over composition. 100 years of brand history didn't get Skippy to drop the one ingredient that exists purely so you don't have to pick up a spoon and stir the jar yourself. Skippy is also the number 2 brand by market share in this country, behind only Jif, which means the 2 most purchased peanut butters in America are running the same basic formula philosophy at slightly different ratios. Not 2 genuinely different approaches to what belongs in the jar. Number 1. Jif Creamy Peanut Butter, the one sitting in more American pantries than every other brand combined. Jif controls close to 1/3 of the entire US peanut butter market, well clear of its closest competitor, Skippy, which holds under 20% and has held that position for years running. It's been on shelves since 1958, first under Procter & Gamble, and since 2001 under the J.M. Smucker Company, and Choosy Mums Choose Jif remains one of the most recognized food slogans in American advertising history, running in various forms for decades and shaping how multiple generations of shoppers were taught to think about what counts as a trustworthy jar before most of them could read an ingredient panel. That's not a minor regional brand. That's the default jar in the cabinet for tens of millions of households, the one people reach for without a second thought, because it has simply always been there, generation after generation. Read what's actually inside it. Roasted peanuts, sugar, then 2% or less of molasses, fully hydrogenated vegetable oils, rapeseed and soybean, mono and diglycerides, salt. Sugar sits second on the list, ahead of every texture management ingredient that follows it. Molasses adds a second, deeper layer of sweetness underneath that. The fully hydrogenated oil is doing the same job you've now seen in all 6 other jars on this countdown, and the mono and diglycerides repeat a stabilizing role you've already seen in a few of them too. 140 milligrams of sodium, 2 grams of added sugar, every 2 tablespoons at close to 17 cents an ounce, nearly double the roughly 10 cents an ounce Walmart charges for Great Value's near identical result. None of that is unusual for the category, and that's exactly the point being made here. The single most purchased peanut butter in America isn't an outlier formula. It's the formula this entire aisle was built around, running at the largest possible scale. Every other brand in this video's skip section runs a smaller scale version of this same basic approach. The 3 brands in the buy section did something else entirely. They walked away from it. Now that you know what's filling that 10% across 7 of the biggest names in this category, here's what happens on the other side of that same allowance. When a brand looks at the exact same legal permission to add sugar, oil, and stabilizers, and simply doesn't take it. Best option number 3, Smucker's Natural Creamy Peanut Butter. The one that proves natural can actually mean something on this shelf. Smucker's makes Jif. Smucker's also makes this jar, sold under its own name, built from 2 ingredients total, peanuts and a dash of salt, listed on the panel as contains 1% or less of salt. No sugar, no hydrogenated oil, no emulsifiers of any kind. It will separate in the jar, because that's what unrefined peanut oil naturally does when nothing is added to stop it. And you'll need to stir it before the first use, which is the honest trade-off for skipping every ingredient. The 7 jars above added specifically to avoid that step. 110 milligrams of sodium, 2 grams of naturally occurring sugar with 0 grams added, 8 grams of protein per serving. It runs close to 10 cents an ounce, essentially the same price as Great Value's much longer ingredient list, and noticeably cheaper than the company's own flagship Jif formula. The same corporation that owns the best-selling processed jar in the country also proves inside its own product lineup that the simpler version was always technically and financially possible. They just don't put the marketing budget behind it. Best option number 2, Crazy Richard's Creamy Peanut Butter, the one with exactly 1 ingredient. Crazy Richard's ingredient panel reads, in full, peanuts. Nothing else. No salt, no sugar, no oil of any kind, no emulsifier. It's a women-owned certified B Corporation built around a single premise, that peanut butter doesn't require anything. Peanuts don't already provide on their own. It's dry roasted, ground and jarred, and the oil separation you'll see sitting on top when you open it isn't a flaw. It's proof that nothing was engineered into the formula to hide it. 180 calories per serving, made entirely from US-grown peanuts, priced around 22 cents an ounce, sold nationally at major retailers including Walmart. That means the closest, purest version of the 10% you never needed is sitting on the same physical shelf as Jif in most grocery stores in this country. You don't have to drive to a specialty market to find it. You have to walk past the biggest, most familiar label on the shelf and read a smaller jar sitting right next to it. The texture is noticeably looser than anything covered in the skip section, with a distinct top layer of oil you're meant to stir back in. And the flavor is more concentrated and more purely nutty precisely because there's nothing else in the jar competing for space on your palate. Best option number 1, 365 by Whole Foods Market. Organic creamy peanut butter, the one that wins by refusing everything the other 9 jars added. This is USDA certified organic, made from a single ingredient. Organic dry roasted peanuts. 0 milligrams of sodium. No added sugar. No oil of any kind. No emulsifier. It's the only jar in this entire video where the ingredient panel and the nutrition label both read as close to just peanuts, independently verified organic, as a shelf-stable, mass-produced national product can get. It ranks first not because anything special was done to the peanuts inside it, but because it's the clearest demonstration of this whole video's central argument. The FDA's 10% allowance was never a requirement. It's a permission slip. 7 of the 10 jars covered here used it fully. This one, sold at a major national grocery chain, simply declined to use any of it. Organic certification means the peanuts were grown without synthetic pesticides or fertilizers under USDA audited standards, which is a claim about how the crop was farmed, not a claim about what's in the jar beyond the peanuts themselves. And it's worth keeping those two things separate, rather than assuming organic automatically means additive-free. In this specific case, both happen to be true at once. Here's what this actually comes down to. The FDA lets peanut butter be up to 10% something other than peanuts. And that number isn't a red flag by itself. It's a legal ceiling, not a mandatory quota that every manufacturer has to hit. 7 of the biggest names in this aisle treat it like a quota anyway, filling it with sugar for taste and hydrogenated oil for convenience. Formula after formula converging on nearly the same small handful of additives because they solve the same 2 problems: oil separation and blandness. 3 brands looked at that identical allowance and asked whether either problem was actually worth solving with an added ingredient at all. They decided a jar that needs stirring once, the first time you open it, is a smaller cost than a jar that isn't just peanuts anymore. One more pattern worth naming before the checklist. Across this whole video, price didn't track with ingredient simplicity in either direction. Great value, tied for the longest ingredient list in the skip section, was also the cheapest jar by the ounce. Smucker's Natural, 2 ingredients total, cost almost exactly the same as Great Value. Jif, sitting in the middle of the skip section on complexity, was the priciest jar among the 3 skip section brands with a confirmed per ounce price in this video. Whatever you're paying extra for at the top of that range, it isn't fewer additives. It's the label, the shelf placement, and nearly 7 decades of advertising. Before your next grocery run, here's the 60-second version. Turn the jar around and count. If the ingredient list runs longer than 2 items, you're most likely looking at added sugar, hydrogenated oil, or both. Doing work the peanuts were never given the chance to do themselves. Look specifically for the word hydrogenated. In its fully hydrogenated form, it's not a trans fat risk. The science on that is settled, but it's still a reliable marker that a brand chose convenience over composition. Check where sugar sits in the ingredient order. Second on the list means it's doing real, measurable work in the formula, not sitting there as a trace amount. And if a jar needs a stir the first time you crack the lid, that's usually the tell that nothing was added to engineer that step away, which is about the closest thing this aisle has to a shortcut for finding the 3 brands instead of the 7. If this changed which jar you're reaching for next, tell someone who's still buying whichever one is already sitting open in their cart.